and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your part 3 of 72 host, Madelyn.
I'm your all 12 episodes drop today host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. This time, it's side quest week, side quest number 1 of our rotation, which means it's my turn to pick what we're going to be talking about. And I decided that this week's side quest topic is going to be episodic games. So we're actually going to release this episode in 5 parts over the next 5 days. Just like 12 minutes at a time.
No.
I'm sure Emma has done that.
Nope. I'm getting a call from future Emma, and she is saying she has not, in fact, done this. Since we are, of course, live now at noon on Sunday.
Oh, you're right. My mistake. Sorry about that. So this week's episode, it was inspired, obviously, I think, by Deltarune's surprise return.
Yes.
With episode 2 this past weekish to the Switch and to computers. Which I have not, to be clear, this is not a Deltarune review cast. I have not played Deltarune Chapter 2 yet. Partially because I remember very little of Deltarune Chapter 1, to be honest. I feel like I'm going to have to go back and replay that first. But that was, as opposed to Emma's always inspiration of like, I don't know. I thought of it. This one, I'll lay my cards on the table. Inspired by Deltarune and by the more Life is Strange that's been around lately as well. So I just want to talk about, like, what is an episodic game? I said this to Clickbait Boyfriend, and he was like, I don't understand what the difference is between that and a sequel. So I guess that's a question we have to answer. What makes a game episodic, and what just makes it a standalone game? What are the benefits and drawbacks for this, both for developers and for consumers? Are episodic games good or bad, actually? And all that good stuff.
Cool stuff.
So I actually don't think that I've ever played one of these games as they came out. I haven't played that many in general, but with the exception of, I guess, Deltarune now, I haven't ever, I think as a result of me being mostly on current games hiatus while I was in college, I kind of missed the big heyday of the episodic game.
Yeah. I think I played, I don't know if I don't think I ever finished Life is Strange, but I think I played the first 3 episodes as they came out. And I don't remember, the only other one I can think of that I might have played as it came out is, like, Tales from the Borderlands, but I don't remember if I waited, I played that after it all came out or not.
So all this to say, it's all theoretical.
Yeah.
It's all a theory podcast this week. But that's partially because episodic games, like I said, I feel like had a real, if not popularity exactly high point, a real visibility high point in kind of the mid-2010s or so. And then since then, with the decline of, in particular, episodic game forefront company, that's a really technical term, with Telltale Games being defunct and then sort of not defunct and whatever, it sort of faded from the limelight. Not to say these don't continue to come out, obviously it was inspired by games that are coming out now, but the moment where everyone was like, this is the future of gaming, has kind of passed.
Yeah. Even the new Telltale, which is, not really Telltale, but
right, of course,
they're zombie or whatever, have said that they're not making episodic games, that their games will be released all at once. And the latest Life is Strange was released all at once as well.
So, let's get down to brass tacks, folks. What is an episodic game? It's basically what it sounds like, or I thought that, at least, until I asked the question of my video gaming partner, and he was like, what's that? That's not what he sounds like.
No,
So
I think that was a great impression.
Thanks. I'm sure he'll enjoy this when he listens to it in 9 months.
Yeah.
So I would consider an episodic game a game that, I mean, it is sort of hard to get down to it of like what's the difference between a sequel and a game that's released in episodes sometimes. To me, it comes down to how it's marketed more than anything else, I think. I mean, there's definitely something to it about the cliffhangers and how the story arc comes together, perhaps, right? But I think it's fair to say, look, that's probably true of some sequels as well. So in the end, there has to be a certain level of cliffhangeriness between episodes, and it has to be offered as kind of a package deal. Those would be my two components. Anything you want to add or subtract?
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and now that I'm thinking about it live, I'm now sort of backing down from this opinion. But I was thinking about, like, like Deltarune Chapter 2's released. It's been, 3 years since Chapter 1, which makes it feel more like a sequel, just because of the length of time in between the two. But I don't really... And maybe that's just because I am, paying attention to it as it comes out. But I was thinking, there's been long periods of time between, Kentucky Route Zero's acts releasing, and I don't think of those...
Very long periods of time for that one.
I don't think of those as sequels. Not any longer than Deltarune, I don't think.
That's fair. Sorry, I didn't mean... But I also think of Deltarune as being a very long period of time.
Yes, you just, emphasized it, and I think it's not... If you count the little interludes in between each act, there is not significantly longer in Kentucky Route Zero's case.
Fair enough.
So I don't know. I was very sure of this. I was like, yeah, the length of time in between, because, if they release episode 1 and then, the next one comes out within a few months, that feels more episodic than sequel-based. But clearly that doesn't hold true 100% of the time.
Yeah, I think the issue also is that we sometimes see games that use the word episode in the title that would not really be episodic, right? Isn't the Final Fantasy VII thing an episode?
No, it's not called that. The Final Fantasy 15 DLC is
That's
called
what I was
episodes.
thinking of.
Yeah.
I was mixing those together. And obviously that's DLC. That's more in the sequel world than something that I would really consider to be... Well, I know it's not a sequel.
Yeah,
but
all
it's
of those
add-on. Take
place during the game. And everybody was very this should have been in the game proper. I'm a baby. That was my impression.
Well, that baby issue is probably something we ought to talk about later as well. Because, of course, also in the mix is, okay, so we've got sequels versus episodes. And then we have episodes versus, DLC, add-on, / live service games, or games that incorporate some elements of live service anyway, as that becomes more and more common. So that can be a little bit difficult to parse as well. But I think, in the end... It all comes down to a matter of perspective, and I'll also, trust the company, right? If I can buy it as a bundle pack somehow, and not in, a, collection-type bundle pack, I'll trust that it's all one game. You know it when you see it.
Yeah.
How about that? It's harder to define than you'd think, though. It feels like it'd be very obvious.
What is that? It's obscenity, is you know it when you see it, or whatever?
Yes.
Yes, obscenity and episodic games. Share the rule.
Share this quality, that you know them when you see them.
Yeah.
Anyway, of course, as we mentioned, a lot of the really high-profile ones that you may have played are going to be from Zombie Studio Telltale Games. But of course, Don't Nod, who makes Life is Strange, also makes these kinds of games. Emma's been talking about... Emma just finished Kentucky Route Zero on the last side quest, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one. Of course, Deltarune is in the news. But these predate that 2010s period that well, I mean, Deltarune is past that, obviously, but that mid-2010s period where a lot of these were coming out. The first ones, I mean, this makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Obviously, this style of game release owes a lot to the idea of, like, Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop, like, gameplay sessions, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're playing a one-shot campaign or some kind of just, like, very, very, very long play session or something, your tabletop campaign necessarily is going to have to be something that has an episodic structure. Now, whether that's crafted in a very intentional way or whether it's just, oh, we all have to go home because the coffee shop is closing, is up to your dungeon master. But definitely these have their roots in a lot of places that we'll talk about. But it's certainly not a new thing to gaming in general in the 2010s. Mm-hmm. But for video games, right, one of the early pioneers of this, as with most things digital gaming, right, is Valve with Half-Life 2 episodes 1 and 2. Unfortunately, notorious for really setting the standard of these games, often being 1, released with gigantic time breaks between them, and 2, not finished.
Also, just, they really can't count to 3.
Yeah.
Like, they really bring it on themselves. Like, I know that joke is, like, everybody makes it, but it's just so funny. They cannot, nothing, they will never count to 3, ever. You know?
They can't do it.
They can't do it. It's impossible. I just think that's why. They just don't know what comes after 2, and they're trying to hide the fact from all of us.
Does the number 3 appear in any Valve games? Is any game on Steam feature the number 3 in its price? It doesn't. It's illegal.
It's not. 3 is outlawed.
Anyway, yeah, of course, so one thing that really makes the rise of these types of games around that time possible, right, is that before that, and it's still weird to me to think about, I know these are not episodic games, you wrote this in the note, and that was not the point I was making, but it's weird to me to think that at some point, like, we would go to the store and we bought, like, the Age of Mythology Titans expansion.
Yeah.
Right? And, like, we bought that, and there was a box for it, and you had to install it with a disc.
Yeah.
That's so foreign to think about now, even though I know that's something that we did. That was something that had to happen. Or that, like, you would buy expansions for Civilization, and they would be, like, discs that you bought. So, of course, episodic releases, while there were some, were much more difficult as a business model before the rise of digital games purchases. Because this model really relies on either you kind of subscribing to it at the beginning and buying the season pass and then just getting them as they come out, or on the convenience factor of you being able to just, like, purchase the game when it comes out. Yeah. It really doesn't work if you have to go to Best Buy or GameStop or whatever and buy the game every couple of weeks when the new CD comes out. Also, I just imagine the manufacturing price of that would not make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes this possible, but it's also interesting to me that the popularity of these games really rises in that era where peak TV is really at its apex, right? Something that's really notable about almost all of these games, with the notable exception of, like, I mean, obviously Half-Life is not this, right? But with the notable exception also of Hitman, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later. Almost all of these are, like, if you think of an episodic game, you probably think of this kind of next evolution of the LucasArts adventure games, right? That we see with these basically point-and-click adventures where we're also doing the choose-your-own-adventure, choice-based mechanic as the central element of the game. So it's interesting to me that these see a peak in popularity right around at the same time as we see this peak of, like, appointment television. And also during this time where we're really seeing the rise of discourse, capital D discourse, around that kind of appointment television on Twitter and on social media, right? The like new digital water cooler. So it's interesting to me that like these games more or less kind of mirror the idea of a television show, which makes a lot of sense. They're episodes, and that's where we have episodes. But there's so little variance from that. It's interesting.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me is like looking at like an old article about when the Hitman decided to go episodic. They're talking about like it like a marketing type thing, sort of. Like they're like, well, we can put polish on the levels between they come out, but also like it's like a bunch of events where everybody can experience it together. Right?
Yeah.
So they just talked about it in more marketing-like terms, where my impression of, like, Telltale and Life is Strange and Deltarune has mostly been, like, they're episodic just because that's development needed that, right? Like, or the company needed that in order to, like, be financially viable. So even though, like, the more adventure-type games feel more TV-y, it feels like Hitman was more like TV. Like it's the idea of like this marketing idea to like get people interested every time a new level came out, and all the more TV ones are like, well, we're gonna need money, which is totally respectable, by the way. I understand that, even though Telltale managed to run themselves into the ground doing that.
It's respectable while still at the same time being sort of disappointing. To me, not disappointing on the, good for them for making games, right? Making games is hard. But just in terms of, like, service to this genre of game, it's disappointing that so many of the games in this genre, I imagine particularly if you were playing them as they came out with this release schedule that had no real intention behind it. Right? That's not true of every single one of these games, of course. But if you look at most of these, there are weird gaps in the release schedule that obviously are because the development team is behind and the game is not finished, that definitely don't serve the games. And not only do they not serve that specific game, but they also don't serve this whole genre of game by creating this reputation of, you can't bet on when these are going to release, right? You have no idea what you're signing on for if you buy a season pass, right? And of course, some of that is unavoidable, and it's a cool idea to be a small studio and be able to either generate enough buzz to, like, attract a real publisher, maybe, or just to sell the game and actually make some money on the first episode to fund the next one. It's just a bummer that you can't do that without feeding into this narrative of this is a money grab, or this game isn't finished, or whatever it is, right? Yeah.
That's also why Tell Me Why was interesting, which Tell Me Why is the latest game from Don't Nod. The new Life is Strange is actually made by Deck 9, who did, like, the prequel game, the Before the Storm. Mm-hmm. But Tell Me Why was released weekly, right? So it was pretty much, it was done, if not, it was done when they released the first episode, but they still...
absolutely. Yeah, there's no way it wasn't done.
Maybe they were bug testing the last episode still, but it was done. So they just made the choice to release it weekly, and I'm really curious to see, whenever Don't Nod makes their next game, if they will continue with that, or if, like, that experiment proved to them that, like, episodic games just aren't worth it in a lot of ways. But that's the only one I can think of where it's like they did it on fully on purpose with development complete on the game.
Yeah, it's the weekly schedule is sort of, on the one hand, I'm very impressed. I'm like, good for you. This game is sort of like a television show, and you released it like a television show. Like, you did it, you proved it could be done, your producers should get gold stars, right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, personally, I'm like, unless the chapters are incredibly short, which they may be in this game. I have not played Tell Me Why, nor read too much about it beyond seeing it mentioned as I prepared for this episode. But a weekly release schedule for games almost feels too dense for me. At that point, I'm like, well, why aren't you just releasing it all together? Because realistically, I'm an adult, right? And sometimes I have weeks where I'm busy and I don't play as much games, right? And so unless the chapters are so short as to be like, you're going to play the chapter basically in a single play session, which again, they may be, right? If that's the case, then maybe this works.
How Long to Beat has it at 10 hours total. So with 3 episodes, that's probably like 3 hours and 15 minutes each.
So that's not to say that that's not a game that you could beat, each chapter in that week and be ready for the next one. But I don't know, I'm having a reaction to it that's like, well, if it's me, like, realistically, I end up getting behind at some point, and I end up playing the last 2 chapters together anyway, or something, right? But maybe that's a little bit reductive. I'm trying to see past my initial reaction to that maybe the idea here is, no. Like, if you're signing on for this experience, you're signing on for this kind of appointment viewing, right? Where the ideal experience of the game is you're going to play it twice a week for those 3 weeks and finish it, like you would a television show. I have a weird reaction to it with a game, and I don't quite know why.
I think there's a lot of interesting potential for design in just forcing the player to step away from it at certain points for whatever reason, whether it's episodic or the game's just like, go away.
Yeah.
At certain parts of the narrative, that games haven't, like, played around with at all. So it's hard to say, like, whether, and without, I don't think Tell Me Why got, like, stunning reviews, but I don't think it would have gotten stunning reviews regardless of its release. So it'll be interesting to see what Don't Nod's next game is, and if they stick with this, if they have internal data that they haven't released on how this did for them.
Right.
It certainly seems like a way to try and keep a game in the current conversation longer than it might in the usual cycle. Like, usually when a game gets released, I see it for, like, I don't know, a week really heavily on my Twitter feed. And if it's really big, maybe longer. Or if I happen to follow artists who like it, maybe even longer. But in terms of, like, having real conversation, it really doesn't stick around for very long. So that is one thing that keeping it separated does. Also, I think binging stuff often hurts the experience regardless of what it is. So, like, games designing ways to make the player stop is interesting to me, at least theoretically.
Oh, I agree for sure. I think what's particularly challenging to me to think about this kind of, like, okay, it's 3 releases 1 week apart each, and it's a 10-hour game, is it feels like such a small percentage of the players will experience the game that way. Relative to, like if we think about something else that I think is interesting to me about kind of the rise and fall and, like, now maybe potential for rise again of episodic games is it goes so much with kind of what we valued about television, right? They rise in this era where the television that everybody wants to watch is on cable, and you tune in for it on Sunday nights, and then you talk about it the next day, right? And then, as that's happening, it's of course happening at the same time, but then following that, we have this period where it's like, nope, the television you want to watch is on streaming, and the series the season all drops at once, and if you want to talk about it, you have to get up at midnight, and you have to watch the whole Stranger Things series, and you have to be ready to talk about it the next morning, right?
Yeah.
And then I feel like now we're starting to move back toward We're moving back toward that cable television model, right? But it's streaming this time. But also, we're moving back toward there's a lot more stuff that's dropping week to week. I mean, I'm over here like, give me my Bake Off every Friday, right? Give me my What We Do in the Shadows every Friday. But the real big example, right, is The Mandalorian, obviously, which did command the conversation over the course of several months because it released weekly. And so it's interesting to me, like with a television season, right, you can bet that, you know, a good chunk of the people who are really interested in or even moderately interested in it are going to be watching it as it airs, right? Now, of course, now you probably also have to be planning for what's the experience of somebody binging it on Netflix, right? But you can still, like, imagine your primary audience being the one that's watching it week to week with you, I imagine. As opposed to with something like this game, I don't really think you can bet on your primary audience. I mean, maybe you can. I don't know. I don't know a lot about what percentage of sales or plays of a game happen in those first couple of weeks after it comes out, right? But at least in my experience as someone who plays games, with the exception of games that I'm just like absolutely all in on and like really, really, really don't want to be spoiled, I'm playing that game at some point. And so it's interesting to think about, okay, if you've crafted this as an episodic story, how do you maintain that even though probably, especially because this game is on Game Pass, right? Even though probably like 90% of your players are not playing along with you at that cadence. That's what's so interesting to me about the really short drops for this, because unlike with television, there's just not a lot of precedent for that.
Yeah. I mean, I will say 3 hours in a week is not very much time.
No, it's definitely not.
Yes.
I don't mean to say it's unreasonable to expect someone to play 2 hour-and-a-half play sessions of the game or 3 hours or whatever in a week. I'm not saying like they've paced this in a way where it's impossible. My point is more, what a very intentional way to drop the game that's really interesting. How unfortunate that probably only a very small percentage of players will experience it as intended that way.
Isn't that the case for like all TV too, though?
But I feel like the difference with TV is that you can bet that a higher chunk of people are watching along with you. That may not become true, like, over the wide, broad period of time, but if I look at, like, people who watched The Mandalorian within the year that it first came out, I feel like a good chunk of them are watching along with you week to week, as opposed to people who played this game as it came out.
I think it would probably be more useful, and we don't have any of this data, so I'm just speaking theoretically here, but it's probably more useful, like, comparing Tell Me Why and The Mandalorian to look at, like, percentages. Like,
Fair.
the people watching The Mandalorian are, like, people who love Star Wars, you know, are tuning in every week when it comes out because they're really into Star Wars and whatever. And then Tell Me Why, you might be like, okay, so really big Life is Strange fans, for instance. Like, how many of those are tuning in as it comes out and playing it, for example? Because obviously raw numbers are going to be nothing, of course. So you'd have to look more into, like, demographics to really figure out whether this is working for them or not.
I get it. I think thinking about it now as you're saying that, more of what I'm saying is, I wish I knew more about why they decided to release it that way.
Oh,
was
sure,
Was it purely because they wanted to get 3 weeks of marketing? I'm sure that's why The Mandalorian was spaced out, that they knew they could dominate Twitter for like 2 months by doing it week to week. And look, whatever, we can talk about if there were artistic reasons for it as well, right? But when television shows drop that way, you have to think a lot of the time it's because they know that they can do that water cooler week to week to week. As opposed to...
I mean, you know, well, Mandalorian's a little bit different because it's a huge brand, but I tend to think, like, well, you're either doing it week to week and hoping that people start paying attention, or you're just throwing your show into the ocean and, like, hoping a fisherman fishes it up. You know, it's like throwing, like, one big fish into the ocean or, like, a bunch of tiny little fish, you know?
Right. No, it's true.
There's so much TV that drops on Netflix that just, like...
Plop.
Because there's so much TV now.
Yeah. Another thing that I hadn't thought of foolishly before this, and that's going to seg into something not Mandalorian, I promise. I've not even watched The Mandalorian, right?
I would like
to see the baby. But, of course, The Mandalorian, right, was the killer app for Disney Plus, right? And so it occurs to me that, of course, it makes sense to drop it week to week because you want people to stay subscribed, right? And the longer that you can keep them, not only just like they have to pay for an extra month of the subscription, right? But the longer that they're used to paying for it and the more other stuff they find on the app while you're there because you have to have it for The Mandalorian, the more likely they are to stay. And I don't know why I hadn't thought about that as like the obvious reason that show would be week to week. Is it so cynical? Right, whatever. Like, I'm sure that The Mandalorian has good artistic work that benefits from it being episodic, right? But also it's Disney, so I don't feel like too bad that I'm like trash talking it in this way. So that to me is an interesting parallel to what I think and what I read a little bit as like the potential opening for these sorts of games to resurrect, right? Which is Xbox Game Pass. Maybe it's also Netflix's thing, but that's so nebulous right now, and I find it scary.
It's just weird.
I didn't realize they were focused on mobile games.
Yeah. They're focused on mobile games.
That's weird. That's not what I thought it would be at all.
You thought it would be, like, on the app?
I thought it would be Bandersnatch.
Yeah.
But with game character, like with Sonic.
No. They want to make their own stuff.
I mean, I know, that was a joke, but still.
I don't have, like, Amazon games, for instance, is really a mess. So, I don't think Netflix is going to be able to do any better.
Fair. My point being, gaming subscription services feel like the natural window, if this is something that companies are wanting to resurrect this concept.
Yeah.
That being said, I'm interested in all of that talk about the weekly release schedule was really me just wanting to also talk about, I'm interested in intentionally spaced experiences like this, as I think are you. And it's cool to have seen them release it week to week with Tell Me Why, because obviously it's like, maybe if even if the reason was just for marketing reasons they wanted to space it out like that, it was clearly intentionally thought through and released in the way the development team thought like best served it.
Yeah.
And I would be, well, on one hand, I am the whiny person that's like, I don't remember what happened in Deltarune. Wah, wah, wah. And like, I'm that way about television that I haven't seen in a while too, sometimes. I'm also interested in like, okay, how do you take this model and tell a story that it actually makes sense to be told over a longer period of time? I think another thing that's often kind of frustrating, right, about the Telltale model is like, yeah, it's built around the cliffhanger, which, like, cool, right? That's what, like, the TV episode is, sort of. But there's something that's lost there in the sense that, you know, other than the cliffhanger, what's the point of this story being told in 5 pieces?
Yeah.
And I'd love to see games that explore more that passage of time and make that intentionally part of the story.
Yeah.
But that's a risky design move, of course.
Yeah. Life is Strange 2 sort of did that, like, unintentionally. In that, like, each episode would have pretty significant, like, lengths of time between when they took place. Because it's basically, like, a road trip down to Mexico. Well, a fugitive road trip down to Mexico, basically. So you check in on the brothers on different points in their journey, basically, with, like, time having happened in between. And that game especially, which really did not do it any favors marketing-wise, actually, but had very long periods in between its releases, just because like they just had to make everything for each episode, right? There was not a lot that they could reuse in each episode because of that concept, right? They were all new characters, all new locations, all new stuff that had to happen for each episode. And I think they got behind on development because it expanded like that. But technically it lined up with, like, the time periods within the game. But in that case, it really, like, flew under the public consciousness radar because the gaps in between episodes were too long. Toby Fox can get away with that because he will dance in the dog costume.
Because everybody loves Undertale.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I can't think of Deltarune as separate games, because it's too short. I realize that that's a reductive way to think about it, and like games can be full games and be short, but I can't think of it as two separate games because part 1 was like I played it in like a day.
Chapter 2 seems to be like 8 hours based on my observations.
Okay. Cool. So that's definitely longer than the first chapter, to my memory, anyway. But I think that marketing problem with Life is Strange 2 is exactly why Game Pass is like the perfect, I mean, as someone who doesn't have Game Pass, right, but whatever, is exactly why that kind of service is the perfect home for these kinds of experiences.
Game Pass is the best deal in gaming.
Look, it definitely is, right? Like, that's just true. But no, the best deal of gaming is that Yakuza 0 is on sale for like $4 on a site right now, people. And you should get it.
The Yakuza game should be released episodically.
You proposed that. I think that's the funniest thing I've ever heard.
They all the games put the little recaps in between chapters anyway, like you stepped away from it in between chapters, right? Like they sort of expect you to.
Some of them do. I don't think all of them do.
Well, Yakuza 0 does. I'm pretty sure Yakuza 7 does, and Judgment does, so.
All the games Emma has experienced.
The newer ones. How about that?
You're right. Fair enough.
Have, like, these like, things. Especially Judgment, like, wants to be, like, a drama TV show. It's even got, you know, Japanese Justin Timberlake in it as the star.
He's gonna ruin it for everyone, you know.
I cannot remember his first name. Kimura. That guy. And I think that those should be released, like, every 2 weeks. Like, a chapter every 2 weeks.
But see, that would be dope. I mean, whatever. I am so invested in those games that would work really well for me, and it would feel like a television show. And, like, I find that sort of exciting. Also, for me, as someone who has the unfortunate tendency to, like, start one and then be unable to really do anything else, that would be helpful.
It would probably be hard to set up, like, the side content, I guess. Maybe you just unlock more as more episodes come out.
Yeah, it would be... Well, but it's like, if you're releasing it every 2 weeks, the game's, like, done anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So, in some ways, that would serve this really well, right? If you're someone who like, feels like this is an opportunity to get ripped off, right? Then it's like, oh, okay, but, like, by chapter 4, you've pretty much unlocked all the side quests. So if you want to, like, if you don't want to put down the game yet and you want to, like, pursue your platinum, right? You can do that. I actually think that would, in some ways, assuage a lot of the kind of, like, ing around this kind of release schedule that there sometimes is, because if all that content, that side content, is there for you, and it's just the main story that's going to go week to week to week, man, I spend 2 weeks doing just side quests all the time in Yakuza, so that would be fine. That would be cool, though. Man. Yeah, that would be dope. Sega. RGG. Are you listening?
Those were the first games that came to mind when being like, what games would work episodically? I was like, yeah. Yeah, because I would support it. Then
again, I would also support, I mean, I guess they have mini games that are basically this. I would support a Telltale style Yakuza spinoff.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool. But I would support any genre of Yakuza spinoff. I totally lost where I was going with this. You talked about Yakuza, my brain went, oh man, maybe I'll actually start Judgment today. Yeah, it's gone. Whatever the big insightful thing that I was going to add as a result of this. Oh, I know what it was. I wanted to talk about Hitman.
Okay.
Because you talked about Yakuza, which of course, yeah, is much more in this, obviously brawler or now RPG mode, but almost all of the examples of these games that were released this way, as we've talked about, have been these story-based narrative, basically games that want to be television shows. And one of the only major examples that's not this is the Hitman game that came out in 2016, the start of the kind of trilogy that they just wrapped up, that was released one map at a time over the course of that year. And people hated it.
Until they liked it.
I know. It's fascinating to me because it really seems like, well, on one hand, I could certainly see the grumpy fanboy reaction of, like, it's just their excuse to, like, not finish the game, right? And they don't want to delay it, and they're making you pay in advance for who knows when you're going to get stuff, right?
I don't think they did, actually, because I think the first release was, like, $10 or $12.
Look, I'm not saying this is rational. I feel like I've read this. But when you think about the way that, like, real fans of Hitman play Hitman, it makes a lot of sense, and it feels very intentionally done.
Yeah.
Especially given that at that time they had the backing from Square Enix. And it's like, surely they didn't need to do this for money reasons.
Hey, Square Enix owns or publishes for Don't Nod, too, so they just like episodic releases over there.
Somebody there is like, this is cool.
Well, apparently they don't love it. They did drop Hitman after this,
yeah.
So. But they were in on it then.
I liked Life is Strange better. But it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, I think this is part of the reason that Hitman is not my particular cup of tea, but I can appreciate how the appeal of the game is really that you replay the level kind of over and over and over again to learn how things work and get that perfect, beautiful assassination where they step in the puddle of water that you've dropped with the live wire and electrocute themselves, and it looks like a tragic accident.
Yeah.
Right? So in that sense, it's like, oh, this makes perfect sense as a game to be released in episodes. Even though the story, obviously, running through Hitman is not especially, like, you're not coming back to it because you want to find out what happens next to the agent, right? So in that way, it's like, that's an interesting way to kind of, like, get everyone talking, have everyone playing and discovering things in the new levels at the same time. I was like, I thought that was cool. And it was kind of lame. People were like, nope, absolutely not to it.
It's very different, is the thing. It's just that, like, every time it's like, this is weird. You know, it's like the initial knee-jerk reaction that you had to tell me why just a few minutes ago.
Yeah. I am the gamer.
Yes.
I look in the mirror and I see the gamer, and it is me.
Yes. Despite everything, it's still a gamer.
You're still a gamer. Well, do you think these are going to come back?
I don't know.
Kojima wants to do it.
I mean, if Kojima wants to do it, he can do whatever the heck he wants. Nobody can stop him now. He is lost control. No one has a leash on Kojima.
His rationale for it makes a lot of sense, right? Like, he wants to do it because he knows he's going to be making big blockbuster games, but he also wants to do other things.
Yeah.
In which case, it's like, oh, okay, like, that's actually kind of cool. On the one hand, it also means that you are going to get that horrifying thing where they are released on no schedule. But probably in the same way that Toby Fox can get away with it, I'm sure that Hideo Kojima could get away with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly, isn't that really what he wants? Like, doesn't he really want to be making movies and TV anyway?
Yeah.
So, like, if Netflix isn't talking to him about, like, an exclusive deal for their streaming game service, they really should be.
Gotta make Mads Max.
I hate that. Did you know that he's in a Rihanna music video? Did you see those going around?
No. That's funny.
He's in Be Better Have My Money.
Wait, Mads Mikkelsen or Hideo Kojima?
No, not Hideo Kojima,
Okay.
Mads Mikkelsen.
Just making sure we were on the same page.
Anyway, he's in that music video and he plays the bee.
Wow.
He's apparently very proud of that. You should look up some interviews. This is the like light note here, listeners. You should look up some interviews of that with Mads Mikkelsen. But you're right. He will be the star of Hideo Kojima's like remake of Breaking Bad or whatever as an episodic game.
Yeah. No, I wish more like big, creators or big studios would do more like in between like their big releases, just release like little silly games, or little creative experiments to like encourage like training things. You could make them like training things for new hires, for example, if you put them working on that to like, get used to working on a project and be creative with it and then bring them onto your like big titles. Seems like there's a lot of room there.
The gamers would not abide that.
I know.
I just want to be clear.
I was thinking about it when
this. Where's Final Fantasy Remake Part 2? Where's Brewster?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the sounds you would get.
Yeah. I was, like, when... This is off topic, but, like, in the Nintendo Direct, when they were showing more of, like, Yoko Taro's new little card RPG thing, I was like, this is so cool. It makes me so happy when, like, creators I like make like little things that are outside like the series they known for, especially in video games where like it's so encouraged to just like keep making more of whatever, and yet you go on Twitter, it's like I'm not really interested if it's not near. It's like, what? Come on, man.
It's interesting to me that game studios haven't. I mean, it's not interesting because, of course, the reason is that everyone is overworked and underpaid. There's no time for this. But putting that aside, it's interesting to me that game studios haven't developed, like, the second stage model of any relatively large theater organization, right? The idea is like, oh, you have the big show, if you're one of the big nonprofit houses in New York, right? It's like you have the big show on Broadway and you've got something running in your off-Broadway theater and you've also got a lot of little stuff going on at the same time.
Yeah.
And obviously it's like, well, maybe that's what Telltale was trying to do, and look at how that happened. But it would be interesting. I agree with you. Like, I would love to see more small experimental stuff coming out.
Yeah. From
companies that can afford to mess around that way.
Yeah. Just because, even in comparison to, like, theater, like, big games are so big.
Oh, yeah.
And you need so many people working on it. And we haven't... The game industry has not figured out how to sustain that, let alone, like, that plus extra stuff. Which is sad.
Look, the theater industry hasn't either. Like, I'm also excited. Something that was kind of cool about some of that work that was happening virtually over the pandemic, right, is that you could see stuff that was like, oh no, like, you're going to check in with this project several times over the next year. Or, like, these characters are going to appear again, right? You're going to see them again in a follow-up. And, like, playing around with releasing things on different schedules or in different formats, or different, just, like, time scales. Right? And that was cool. And now we're going to go back to everything is what it was before, probably, very soon. But I'm interested in all art mediums playing around more intentionally with why they're releasing things in the format that they are. Not just like, why is it theater and not a game? But also like, why is this game released in one big package as opposed to 3 packages over the course of 9 months or whatever it is. But maybe the real future of episodic games is that we get a slow drip of additional content after games release forever.
Yep. It does seem to be where we are right now.
But Brewster's coming.
Yeah, finally. Animal Crossing could have used a little bit of a faster drip of content.
Yeah, Animal Crossing maybe needed someone to plan the episodic release schedule a little better.
Yeah.
Animal Crossing was not prepared for every human being to start playing it in March.
Yeah. To be fair, I don't have a reference for, like, how long, like, when new content came to the older Animal Crossing releases, or what was available when those were released, or whatever. I just remember being able to do a lot more in New Leaf than I was able to in New Horizons.
They intentionally decided to drop Brewster in November, when we'll all be grappling with the fact that we cannot safely go home for Thanksgiving again.
Yeah.
So we can all return to Animal Crossing and have Thanksgiving with Brewster.
But can I make snowmen this winter?
Oh, I forgot about that.
That's really what I want.
Nintendo, hire Emma as your Animal Crossing producer.
Or the flower garden competitions.
Yeah. Maybe next year.
My island probably has so many weeds on it.
I know. I'll pop in again for Brewster. But yeah, it's gonna be Weed City.
Yep.
On the Isle of Sheba.
And all the villagers are gonna make fun of us.
They're usually happy to see you.
Who are you?
Nice. Sad.
Anyway, I will say that my current opinion on episodic models is I am waiting for all of Deltarune to be out before I play it. So I'll see you like 7 years from now or something.
It downloaded, I didn't even really have to download anything except for the fact that I had already not had it downloaded to my, I had deleted it from my Switch to make space.
It was just an update for Chapter 1.
Yeah.
On Switch.
So, because of that, I'm like, okay, I guess I'll play it. It's right there. But yeah, I don't know where I'll fall on the purchasing 3, 4, and 5 before 6 and 7 are announced.
Yeah.
Camp.
I guess we'll see, if he's got a release date for those when 3, 4, and 5 come out.
That will be the test, won't it?
Yeah.
That's the final test for the episodic model. Can Toby set some dates?
Also, his engine works now, and he appears to have hired help for Chapter 2. So, good for Toby.
Well, folks, would you like to see more games released piece by piece? Look, with the release schedule coming up, maybe it would be better if they all just released them a quarter at a time.
Oh yeah, my current request is I would like all games that I would like to play to just take a year off. Horizon can still come out, any big open world thing can still come out. Stuff, Call of Duty, you're free to come out. But if I would be interested, I would just like them all to take a year of vacation. And you can come back next year when I've cleared out my backlog.
Well, folks, are you in camp, Emma? Do you need a year between episodes for you to have time to play the second episode? Are there games that you consider episodic that we haven't talked about? Is Super Smash an episodic game? Discuss. Right?
Interesting.
You made the meme face, the face. Listeners, do you know what meme I was doing there?
The finale of Super Smash Bros. Is coming soon. What's really episodic is the Mr. Sakurai Presents is an episodic series.
You're absolutely right. That is not a video game, but it is a streaming platform hit.
Yeah.
So did you play any of these episodic games as they came out, and what was the experience for you waiting 4 months between Tales of the Borderlands 1 and 2? Or do you just hate this model in general and you're going to come in here and tell me all about how Hitman was bad? If you have any of those thoughts, except maybe the last one, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also check out our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat for our main editions on non-side quest weeks, and check out our blog, featuring long-running episodic series, Clickbait Boyfriend, and Split Screen. It's fitting to talk about episodes, right? Given that we're a podcast, we come out in episodes. Gotta address the elephant in the room eventually. But most importantly, hey, we are a podcast, and if you want to get your steady drip of content, which we do release on a regular schedule, you will never wait 4 months between Talk This editions, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. So subscribe for the season pass. But it's free. It's not a money grab. Nope. Here. Get your Talk This season pass today. I don't remember even a little bit what we're talking about next week.
It's Loop Hero and El Shaddai.
That sounds right now that you say it.
You can bring all your Bible studies knowledge next week.
Excellent. Oh, I am very ready to talk about my religious studies minor. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Get ready for modern mythology and all over the next episode.
Yeah.
It's going to be disgusting.
I'm excited.
Well, if Emma's excited, folks, that means you should definitely tune in. I guess I'll go ahead and sign us off for the week. This week, folks, I hope you remember to tune in again next week for the next episode of Talk This Podcast.